I grew up believing love had boundaries, that there were clear lines drawn by society, unspoken rules about whom you could care for and how much. But when I moved into her house at 15, all those lines blurred. The system had shuffled me around since I was 9, dropping me into unfamiliar homes with people who offered me a roof but not much else. By the time I met Laura, I had learned not to expect much. I didn't know what it meant to be truly wanted. Yet from the moment she smiled at me, I felt something shift. Her kindness wasn't performative. She looked at me like I was more than a case file or a burden. "You're safe here," she said that first day, her voice soft but steady. I wanted to believe her, even if trusting someone felt like setting myself up for disappointment. Laura was different. She was gentle but firm, giving me space when I needed it and structure when I didn't know I did. Her presence filled the house, her laugh during morning coffee, the hum of her voice when she thought no one was listening. For the first time, I felt what a home was supposed to feel like. But as I grew older, things became complicated. At 17, I started noticing details about her I hadn't before. The way her hair caught the light in the kitchen, or how her eyes crinkled when she smiled. I hated myself for it. She was my foster mom, my mother in every way that mattered. And yet, late at night, when the house was quiet and my mind wandered, I couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. I tried to push those feelings aside. I poured myself into school, into sports, into anything that would distract me from the way my heart raced whenever Laura praised me or brushed my arm while passing me the salt at dinner. I told myself it was just misplaced gratitude, the kind of admiration anyone would feel for someone who saved them. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. One evening, everything changed. It was a rainy Sunday, the kind where the world outside felt closed off, forcing us to exist in the same small space. She was curled up on the couch with a book, the soft glow of the lamp highlighting her in a way that made my chest tighten. "Want to join me?" she asked, patting the seat next to her. Her tone was casual, but something in her eyes made my pulse quicken. I hesitated before sitting down, careful to keep some space between us. The movie she chose played in the background, but I couldn't focus. All I could hear was the rhythm of her breathing, the way she shifted slightly closer to me as the minutes ticked by. At one point, she reached for a blanket and our hands brushed. The contact was brief, but it felt like a spark, igniting something I'd been trying to suppress for years. She must have noticed the way I stiffened because she pulled her hand back quickly, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft, concerned. I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't push, but the tension lingered, thick and undeniable. When the movie ended, she stood to turn off the TV, her movements deliberate, almost hesitant. "Good night, Alex," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Good night, Laura," I replied, my voice betraying the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I lay awake for hours that night, my thoughts a chaotic mess. I knew I had crossed an unspoken line, even if I hadn't said or done anything. I told myself it had to stop. Whatever this was, it couldn't exist. Not here, not with her. But the heart is stubborn. And the closer I got to leaving for college, the more desperate I felt to hold on to her, to this life she had given me, and, selfishly, to the way she made me feel. The days blurred into weeks, and though nothing was spoken, the tension between us became a constant presence. I'd catch her glancing at me across the dinner table, her eyes lingering a moment too long before she'd quickly look away. It wasn't just me imagining things anymore. Something unspoken hung in the air, something we were both too afraid to confront. One evening, just weeks before I was set to leave for college, Laura suggested we take a walk after dinner. It was something we hadn't done in a while, not since I was younger and more willing to let myself lean on her. The sun was low, casting the streets in a soft, golden light as we strolled through the neighborhood. Laura seemed quieter than usual, her hands stuffed into her coat pockets. I matched her pace, waiting for her to say whatever was clearly on her mind. "I'm proud of you, Alex," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced over at her, surprised. "For what?" She stopped walking and turned to face me. "For everything. for making it through high school, for getting into college, for becoming the man you are. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump in my throat, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. I couldn't have done it without you. She smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. I didn't do anything. You had it in you all along. That's not true, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. You gave me a home. You gave me everything. Her expression softened, and for a moment we just stood there, the silence between us heavy with meaning. I wanted to tell her how much she meant to me, how much I didn't want to leave, how the thought of being away from her felt like losing a part of myself. But I couldn't find the words. When we got back to the house, I lingered in the hallway, not wanting the night to end. Laura paused at the bottom of the stairs, her hand resting on the banister as she looked back at me. "Good night, Alex," she said softly. I hesitated, then blurted out, "Laura?" She turned, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I'm going to miss you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But then she nodded, offering me a small smile before heading upstairs. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of my unspoken feelings pressed down on me, suffocating in their intensity. I knew I needed to say something, to tell her the truth before I left. But how could I? How do you tell someone who has been your lifeline that your feelings for them have become something they were never supposed to be? The next morning, I woke up determined. I couldn't leave things unsaid. I had to tell her, no matter the risk. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the paper. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up with a smile that made my chest ache. "Morning," she said, her voice warm. "Morning," I replied, sitting down across from her. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to speak. "Can we talk?" She set down her mug, her expression shifting to concern. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I don't know how to say this." Her brow furrowed, and she reached out to place a hand on mine. The touch was gentle, familiar, and yet it sent a spark through me that I couldn't ignore. "It's okay, Alex," she said softly. "You can tell me anything." Her words broke something in me, and before I could stop myself, the truth spilled out. "I don't want to leave because I don't know how to be without you," I said, my voice trembling. "I know it's wrong, and I've tried to push it away, but I care about you more than I should." The room fell silent, the weight of my confession hanging heavy in the air. Laura's hand froze on mine, her eyes wide with shock. "Alex," she began, her voice trailing off. She pulled her hand back, standing abruptly. "You shouldn't feel that way." "I know," I said quickly, standing as well. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. I've tried, but I can't stop." "You have to," she interrupted, her voice firm but trembling. It can't happen, Alex. I'm your mother." "You're not my mother," I said, my voice breaking. "Not really. You're so much more than that to me." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head, backing away from me. "No, Alex, this isn't right. You're leaving for college and you'll move on. You'll meet someone your age, someone who can give you everything you deserve. This ends here." Her words felt like a knife to the chest, but I knew she was right. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to." "Stop," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Alex, just go to college, live your life, and forget about this." I nodded, tears blurring my vision as I turned and walked out of the kitchen. Upstairs, I packed the last of my things, each movement mechanical as I tried to block out the pain threatening to consume me. After 2 years, I returned from college. The house was quiet, just the way I remembered it. But it felt different now. Smaller, somehow like it had shrunk without me there to fill it. Laura was sitting on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting her in warm light. She looked the same and yet not. Her hair was a little shorter, her features softer with time, but her presence was as overwhelming as ever. I sat across from her, talking about college, my classes, my internship, anything to fill the space between us. But the words felt hollow, just placeholders for what I really needed to say. When dinner ended and the dishes were cleared, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The weight of it had been sitting on my chest for years, growing heavier with every passing day. She needed to know. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Laura froze for a moment, then nodded, setting her coffee down. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, every word carefully chosen, though none of it seemed enough. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. About us." Her eyes widened slightly, and I could see the walls going up. "Alex, let me finish," I said quickly, leaning forward. "Please." She hesitated, then nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. The air between us felt impossibly heavy, and I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I know what I said before made things complicated," I began, my voice softer now. "And I know you probably think I've moved on, but I haven't. I can't." "Alex, we've talked about this," she said, her voice shaking. "You were young. You didn't know what you wanted." I leaned forward, my hand brushing hers, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. I knew exactly what I wanted, and I still do. Her breath hitched, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. I knew she felt it too, this pull between us as undeniable now as it had been all those years ago. "I love you, Laura," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I've loved you since I was 17, and no matter how hard I've tried, I can't stop. I don't want to stop." She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "Alex, this isn't. It's not right." "Why not?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because of what people might think. Because of some rule that says we can't feel this way. None of that matters to me. All that matters is you." She turned away, wiping at her eyes, and my chest tightened at the sight of her struggling. I wanted to take her pain away, to tell her it was okay to feel the way we both did. But I knew how hard this was for her. How deeply she cared for me, even if she couldn't admit it yet. "It matters to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because I promised to protect you, Alex. To take care of you. I can't let myself." "You already have," I said, cutting her off gently. "You've taken care of me in every way that matters. And now I want to take care of you." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. But then, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "I love you too," she said. The words so soft I almost thought I'd imagined them. "I've tried not to, but I do." My heart felt like it might explode in my chest. Those words were everything I had been waiting for, everything I had hoped for. But I could see how much it had cost her to say them, how terrified she was of what they meant. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to hear it." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as I stood and stepped closer. I hesitated for a moment, then leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "For now. I'll wait," I whispered, my voice full of quiet conviction. "As long as it takes." As I walked back to the guest room that night, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't know what the future held for us, but for the first time, I felt like we were moving toward it together. The house was still, the kind of quiet that only deep night brings. But my mind wouldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Laura, sitting across from me earlier, her eyes glistening with tears, her voice trembling as she admitted the words I had waited years to hear. "I love you too." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was longing. An ache that no amount of time or distance could dull. The silence pressed against me like a weight, making the walls of the guest room feel too small, too confining. I couldn't stay there any longer. Without fully deciding to, I found myself leaving the room. My footsteps were soft against the wooden floor, the dim glow of the hallway nightlight guiding me to her door. I stopped in front of it, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say or do, But I couldn't stay away. I knocked gently, the sound barely audible in the stillness. For a moment, there was no response, and I wondered if she was asleep. But then I heard a soft rustle of sheets, followed by her voice, groggy and unsure. "Alex?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's me." There was a pause, and I thought she might tell me to go back to bed. But then she said, "Come in." I pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside. The room was bathed in shadows, the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains casting soft, silvery patterns across the bed. Laura was sitting up, her hair slightly mussed, the blanket pulled up to her chest. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, curiosity, and something deeper, something she was trying to hide. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice hushed. I nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. "I couldn't sleep." She tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line as she seemed to search for the right response. "You shouldn't be here, Alex." "I know," I said, stepping closer despite her words. "But I needed to see you." Her breath hitched, and she glanced away, her hands clutching the blanket tighter. "This isn't... We shouldn't..." "Laura," I said softly, taking another step forward. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need you to know that I meant what I said earlier. Every word." She looked back at me then, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "You don't understand what you're asking for," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't something we can just have. It's complicated, Alex. Too complicated." "It doesn't have to be," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I don't care about what's right or wrong in anyone else's eyes. All I care about is you." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, I thought she might let her guard down. But then she shook her head, her expression tightening. "I've spent years trying to convince myself that these feelings weren't real, that I could just be what you needed me to be. But if we do this, everything changes." "It already has," I said, stepping closer until I was standing at the edge of the bed. "You said it yourself, Laura. You love me, and I love you. We can't pretend that doesn't matter." She stared at me, her breathing shallow, and I could see the conflict playing out on her face. Part of her wanted to push me away, to keep the walls she had built between us intact. But another part, maybe the part she had buried for so long, wanted to let me in. I reached out slowly, giving her every chance to stop me, and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, trembling slightly beneath my touch. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than everything." Her breath shuddered, and she closed her eyes as if trying to shut out the weight of my words. When she opened them again, they were filled with unshed tears. "Alex," she said, her voice breaking. It's not fair." "It's not about fair," I said, my grip on her hand tightening just slightly. "It's about what we want, what we need." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy, charged with everything we had spent years trying to deny. And then, finally, Laura let out a soft, trembling sigh. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to be what you need me to be." "You already are," I said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "You always have been." Her eyes searched mine, looking for something, reassurance, maybe, or permission to let herself feel what she had been fighting for so long. Whatever it was, she must have found it, because in the next moment, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to." She closed her eyes, her breath warm against my skin. And then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible nod, she let me stay. I should have moved. I should have pulled away, said goodnight, and walked back to the guest room. But I couldn't. I was frozen, completely consumed by the weight of the moment and the pull between us. "Alex." Laura's voice was barely a whisper. Her tone caught somewhere between a plea and a warning. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted just slightly, as though she were searching for words that refused to come. "I'm here," I said softly, my voice low and steady, though I felt anything but. When her eyes opened, they met mine, and I saw everything she was feeling written there. Fear, doubt, longing, and love, all tangled together in a way that mirrored my own emotions. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me or maybe it was her. But the distance between us disappeared. Our lips met, tentative at first, like we were testing the boundaries we'd been so afraid to cross. Her lips were soft, warm, and when she didn't pull away, I felt something inside me break open. A flood of emotions surged to the surface, years of longing and restraint falling away in an instant. She kissed me back. It was hesitant, filled with the same conflict I knew she was feeling, but it was real. Her hand slipped from the blanket, brushing against my arm as she leaned into me, her breath quickening against my mouth. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us, no rules, no fears, no past or future, just Laura and me. And then she pulled back, her breathing uneven as she pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Her eyes were wide, her expression a mix of shock and something deeper. I shouldn't have, she stammered, her voice breaking. Alex, this is, Laura, I said quickly, cutting her off. Don't say it was a mistake. She looked at me, her tears glistening in the dim light. I don't know what this is, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But it's not something we can just pretend didn't happen. I nodded, my heart still racing. I don't want to pretend. I've never wanted anything more than this. More than you. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, and I reached out to brush it away. Her skin was warm beneath my fingers, and she didn't flinch from my touch. This is so complicated, she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. You're leaving for college. You have your whole life ahead of you. And me? I'm supposed to be the one who keeps you grounded, not the one who... You're everything, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. You're the reason I got through everything, the reason I even have a future to look forward to. Don't you see? You're not holding me back, Laura. You're the reason I've come this far. She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. Her hand moved to mine, her fingers lacing through mine as though she were anchoring herself. I'm scared, she said again, her voice trembling. I know, I said softly. So am I. For a moment we just sat there, the silence stretching between us as we held each other's gaze. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she leaned in again, her lips brushing mine in a kiss that was softer this time, but no less consuming. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, filled with all the things we couldn't say out loud. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine, her breathing uneven. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer, but as I held her hand and felt her warmth next to me, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going anywhere. Not without her.